Hi, my name is Mary Hall. I'm the director of Safe Schools Manitoba. Parents, schools, and community need to work together to address bullying. We know that bullying is a pervasive problem and it can be very vicious and complex. But I really believe if we all work together, we're going to be able to prevent it and to intervene effectively should it occur. Parents play a key role, so we're going to spend the next half hour or so talking about the dynamics of bullying and how parents can work with schools to, as I say, to prevent it from occurring in the first place, and then to intervene in an effective way to make sure it doesn't happen again. In order to do that, we have to be aware of it and we have to understand it. So exactly what is bullying? Recently in Manitoba, there was safe schools legislation, and bullying was defined very explicitly, and I want to share that definition with you. It's when there's an intent to harm, there's an intent to cause a person to be fearful, be humiliated, perhaps their feelings are hurt, or their body, their reputation. These are all really key pieces to think about, because obviously when bullying happens, it can be really hurtful for everyone involved, and especially the victim. There are three main elements to bullying. The first is that there's a sense of power. It might be real. Perhaps a child feels a sense of power and control because they're cooler, they're bigger, they're stronger, they're older. But often it can be more subtle. There's a sense of power and control because they have more friends, they're more popular, and they use that status to hurt other people. The other key piece is an intent to harm. Bullies know exactly what they're doing. It's not an accident. There is that intent to hurt another person, to embarrass them. And if it's not intentional, they should know that it is going to be hurtful. So in that way, there's really no excuses for bullying. And finally, it's typically, but it doesn't necessarily have to be repeated behavior. At one point, we would say, well, with bullying, there has to be a pattern. It has to be repeated. But really, it can be a very vicious one-time attack, and if that happens, then it's bullying, and we need to address it. There are a number of different forms of bullying. The most overt is physical. When I present to students all over the province, and I'll ask them, okay, there's different forms. Can you give me some examples of, say, physical bullying? And this is what they'll say. It's pushing, kicking, shoving, sometimes biting, like stealing from someone. These are physical forms of bullying that, one, can hurt the person's body, and two, really be embarrassing if there is an audience and others are witnessing that child being hurt. The other common form of bullying is verbal. It's basically any time where someone uses their words to hurt another person, name calling, any kind of a vicious comment, accusing someone of something else. Maybe a child will go to the teacher and say, this is what's happening, and they do it just to get that other person in trouble. Or they'll share some sort of a false accusation with other young people, and then they're excluded, and again, the bully knows exactly what they're doing. Any sorts of insults that are based on a person's ethnicity, their race, their disability, their sexual orientation are forms of bullying, but they're also very complex and insidious, and when those forms happen, we need to involve the school administration immediately. Sarcasm. I really believe that there isn't a role for sarcasm anywhere in the world, certainly with children in schools, in homes. So there's a difference between that sort of good-natured, fun teasing and sarcasm that has a real bite to it. And, you know, with all the discussions about bullying, it's also really important for adults to make sure that they're not being sarcastic as well. Because often young people don't understand sarcasm, but they certainly know that it's having an impact on them, and often they'll feel humiliated, embarrassed. Another form of verbal bullying is spreading rumors about someone, and it can be humiliating, embarrassing. They feel it's not warranted, and when everybody else is talking about it, it's even more devastating. And the final example of verbal bullying would be threats. Now, there's a difference between a child saying, I'm not going to be your friend anymore if you are friends with that person, And that would be more like the kind of threat we would see when the children are younger. But with older students, if there's a verbal threat where I'm going to attack you, I'm going to use a weapon, your physical safety is being jeopardized, then that becomes a police matter. We need to get law enforcement involved if there is ever an immediate and imminent threat of for a person's safety. The next form of bullying is what we call either social or relational bullying, and that's a sense of excluding someone, leaving them out. Kids can be devastated if no one ever wants them on their team. They form groups of study activities or working on a project in the classroom, and there's always one or two children who are left out. How does that make them feel? Obviously terrible. So we need to talk to kids, and how would it make you feel if you were that person who is left out? The sense of social exclusion is incredibly hurtful. Another way us kids can be involved in relational bullying is by ruining friendships, destroying friendships and reputations, ignoring someone. That can be, again, incredibly it can be subtle. And when it happens, the children who are doing the bullying, they know exactly what they're doing. And for the child who is the target of being ignored, it can be so hurtful, especially when it happens again and again. Any form of relational bullying can be really subtle. Unfortunately, females can often be the people who are more involved in relational bullying. Certainly guys can do it, but it tends to be females. Females are very social. Friendships are important. You can have one best friend and then someone else is a best friend of that best friend, and it can go on and on. And it can take the form of verbal bullying, but the exclusion, the glaring, the leaving out, the cliques, these would all be forms of relational or social bullying that once again can have a devastating and a long-term impact. So how do we measure this? With verbal and social bullying, it's so quick. It's very difficult at times for a teacher to even be aware of it if it happens in the classroom, because it's just that quick sideways glance where the girls or the guys who are involved in it, they know what they're doing, but as I say, it's really hard for a teacher to pick up on it. Or for parents, when your kids are at home, when you're off in an activity or a sports activity, that social bullying, the verbal, it can happen and it can be so hurtful. And so how do we understand what's going on, look for the signs, and really have an understanding of how devastating it can be? The final form of bullying that I'm going to discuss is electronic, and that's using any form of electronic communication. It could be online polls or text messaging, sites, in any way that our kids will tell me they'll post a video of another student. They can doctor it, they can change it, and it's so embarrassing. I just did a presentation a while ago to students. We talked about cyberbullying and the examples. They laughed. Within 20 minutes, 3 little boys came running in with a cell phone and they said, look at what happened. And they showed me this photo of one of the boys, and it had been someone had, adapted it, where it was very embarrassing. They knew who the cyberbully was. That child wasn't going to be attending one of my sessions until the afternoon, but the boys came running in, like 3 of them, and they just went, it just happened. Look what happened. So of course then we went to the principal who dealt with it. It was phenomenal that those 3 young boys were able to obviously identify and then respond immediately and get the help from parents. Obviously this is an exaggeration, or is it? The kids are learning to use tablets and the various devices so early. It's amazing. That's great. But we also need to understand that it isn't the cell phone, the iPhone, the tablet, the laptop that's causing the problem. They're really just the vehicles for one person to hurt another. So the kids can be running circles around us with their understanding of the technology that is rapidly changing. Where adults come in is to teach them that sense of social responsibility, digital citizenship, knowing right from wrong, helping them to nurture those sense of core values of respect and inclusivity. That's where we come in as adults, as parents and as educators and other members of the community. When we do that and we sit with the children and we have those conversations, then we're going to have fewer problems, and certainly fewer problems with cyberbullying that, as I said, is rapidly growing. Um, Perhaps your child, you might think, I think that he or she might be being bullied at school. Well, how do you know? What would be some signs? A child can have a bad sleep or be angry about something or lose their appetite, that something's happening. And that isn't a cause for concern. But when there's a pattern of behavior, it's prolonged and there's no explanation for it, I would really start to investigate and find out what's going on. With children who are victimized, they'll often feel a sense of shame, maybe guilt. They think it's their fault. It's not their fault. When they're being victimized, sometimes it'll lead to a feeling of anger, like, why is everyone doing this to me? Certainly a sense of depression. It's going to affect their self-esteem without a doubt. Over time, they could start to pull away and you think, wow, they always like going to school, but now they don't want to get up in the morning, or they don't want to go to, some sort of an activity where there are other kids present. Any sort of withdrawal from social activities or school would be cause for concern. Missing possessions, maybe if they come home and there's something that's gone missing and they don't want to share with you what happened, I would be really worried and you want to sort of dig deeper. If cyberbullying is happening, maybe it might be happening when you notice that whenever you come into the room, they close the computer, they put away their cell phone. There's a good chance something's going on and they don't want to let you know about it. Maybe they're the ones that are doing the bullying. Maybe they're the ones who are bystanders and they don't know how to deal with it, or perhaps they're being the victims of cyberbullying. So I'd be really concerned about that as well. Or if they're fearful of getting on the bus, or they always ask that you pick them up after school or drive them to school, that would be some other causes for concern. How does it affect victims? It can be long-term. We know that I've talked to adults, and often they'll come up to me at the end of a workshop and say, you know what, I was bullied in grade 7, and I'll never forget. I never forget the hurt, these feelings of sadness, the anger. I felt worthless, and it can be long term. Unfortunately, there have been some absolute tragic consequences of bullying that we're all well aware of. Bullying can lead to serious depression and suicidal thoughts. It obviously affects the child's self-esteem as well. It can have an effect on their well-being. And with bullying, it can be that vicious cycle. They're already being left out. They're being bullied through that form of social exclusion and the put-downs. And then that becomes a really vicious circle. And then it leads to increased isolation. If any of those forms are happening, it's going to be really hard for them to concentrate on their work. So their schoolwork can suffer. In some extreme cases, they just want to drop out of school. If school is a place where they don't feel safe, they don't feel like they belong, then eventually they're just going to pull away, which obviously is something that we want to be very concerned about and make sure it doesn't happen. Bystanders are also affected by bullying. Once again, I do sessions with students and I always say to them that they give me so much insight as to what the dynamics of bullying, because often they're right in the middle of it. Bystanders play a huge role in bullying. In most cases, there is an audience because bullies get a sense of power when they hurt someone else and others are around, and perhaps they laugh or they jeer or they sort of encourage it. That's what fuels the bullying's behavior. But when I talk to bystanders, they'll say, I don't like it. It makes me I feel bad for the kid who's being bullied. I feel sad. It makes me feel helpless. I don't know what to do. So these are emotions that we really need to attend to. We need to understand, okay, if bystanders are feeling angry and hurt, they feel helpless, they're frustrated. We need to draw on those feelings, because if we don't listen to the bystanders' feelings and the impact it has on them, also it can have a long-term harm. Once again, I'll speak to adults and they'll say, you know what, it happened through high school. One kid's always being bullied and I never did anything. And now in retrospect, it was terrible and I feel guilty and I only wish I had stood up. And if I had, maybe it would have made a difference. Bullies are also affected by bullying behavior. They can also have suicidal thoughts. There could be other things going on in their lives where they have some serious mental health issues, or they have feelings of anger that they can't control, and obviously it's affecting them. As I mentioned at the beginning, bullying is all about power and control. And unless we address that behavior when the kids are young, they're just going to go on through life, and that sense of power and control is going to be reinforced, and they're going to think, this is how I can go through life, this is how I can get what I want. We know there's adults who are bullies. They can be adults in a home, in a school, in the community, in the workplace. Adult bullying is, again, it's always gone on, but we haven't really talked about it much. If we don't address bullying behavior when kids are young, then they can go on to be adults as they're bullying. It's all about that sense of lack of empathy and respect and compassion for others, especially empathy. We need to treat others as they have that sense of care and treat them the way we would want to be treated. When we nurture that compassion and empathy, we're going to have less bullying. And when we don't, it's going to be very difficult for those young people to form that positive relationships with people who are in their lives, and then it just continues. And again, unfortunately, it's a vicious cycle. The kids, they're role modeling others, then they bully others, and it just goes on, and it affects their well-being and their mental health as well. So what can you do? If your child has come to you and reported that they're being bullied at school, or it's been reported to you by another parent or another child, or somehow you start to notice those signs of victimization and you're very, very worried, there's steps to follow. The first step is to talk to your child's classroom teacher, because he or she knows your child best. Perhaps they're not aware of what's going on, because bullying can often happen in the areas where there's less supervision in a school. It might happen in the hallways, back and forth to class, or way out in the playground, in areas where there are fewer adults. Maybe the adults don't know about it. So when your child reports the bullying to you, you need to listen to their concerns, share that information with their teacher. And if you believe the bullying is not being addressed and your child is still being fearful, being affected, being upset, take your concerns to the school principal. Again, share what's happened, the documentation, the history. Explain to him or her that you've already talked to the teacher and your child is continuing to be bullied. If it carries on from there, the next step is to go to the superintendent of the school division and tell he or she what's been going on, again, the documentation, the history, and then it will be dealt with that level. And finally, I'm available to help in any way I can. My contact information is on the slide. You can also go on to the Safe Schools Manitoba website and you can get in touch with me. Give me a call and email. What I'll often do is I'll listen to a parent's concern. I'll find out if you followed the protocol. And then when appropriate, perhaps I could contact the principal or the superintendent and say, this has been reported to me, and is there anything I can do to help? Often they're aware of it and it is being dealt with, but it's, so what are we talking about? It's communication and everyone working together to make sure that the bullying stops. If your child's being bullied, there's some key steps to follow. First of all, you want to listen. Find out, okay, tell me the details, and assure them that it's not their fault. And in every case, it can be really tempting to say, okay, I'm just going to go to the parent of the child who's bullying my children. And I wouldn't advise that. You want to let the school know and let them get the other parents involved and deal with it and determine a consequence. It's always best to go through the school and let the child deal with it. If your child's being cyberbullied, or he or she comes to you and says, I'm looking at this online, I'm not being cyberbullied, but this person is, and I really don't like it. I feel really bad. And if they come to you, you want to make sure you keep a record. Take a photo, bring it right into the principal and say, this is what's going on. And then they can look at the photos, the vicious comments, the rumors. And that basically can be then used as evidence. So you don't want them to delete it. You want to use that to then use that documentation to help the principal. Again, as I said earlier, it can become a police matter, and then that documentation is really important to share with others. You don't want to delete it. And there is always a follow-up. You're contacting the school immediately, and you're providing that source of support, providing resources and counseling. If your child is being bullied, then obviously we need to provide support for them. With involving the police, once again, if the child is fearful of their safety, then it just taken to a whole new level. Raising your child's sense of self-esteem and confidence is essential. If children feel good about themselves, they're far less likely to hurt another child, because why would they? They will they interact with others in a positive way. They're not going to hurt others. If your child has a positive sense of self-esteem and confidence, then they're less likely to become victims. If they have a positive self-esteem and confidence, then they're more likely to be the children who will stand up. You also want to encourage friendships and relationships with kids that would be obviously in school, but also beyond the school walls. And because if children have, the more friends they have, the more likely they're to not be bullied. And at the same time, even if they have just a couple of friends, they don't need to have 50, just a couple of friends who they know are true and sincere, that they can hang out with and talk to and just have fun with. So you want to do whatever you can to nurture those friendships. And at all times, through all of this, check in with your child. How's it going? Is everything, how's it going at school? As I said earlier, they might not be the one who's doing the being bullied, or maybe they're not involved in bullying, but perhaps they're the bystander. And you want to talk to them, and at all times keep the lines of communication open with the school. What do you do if your child is bullying others? Obviously, very upsetting to get a report from the school that your child has been involved in bullying behavior. The first thing you want to do is say, okay, tell me about what's going on. Get to the bottom of it. Can you explain it? Understand the nature and the extent of the problem. Once you have a sense that, okay, there's some serious issues going on around there, and if your child says, oh no, it wasn't me, it's no big deal, but from the reports that you've received, it is a big deal. There's some serious bullying going on here. You want to challenge any sorts of claims of innocence or wrongdoing. And you want to talk to them about, okay, I want you to think about, how did that impact the other child? How would you feel if you were the one that was being hurt? How would you feel if the other person who was being hurt was your little brother or your sister or a friend or a brother or a sister of someone that you know and care about? Sometimes if we internalize those feelings, then they'll go, yeah, I wouldn't like it. Exactly. So when they admit that, then that's when we can start to really address the behavior. You also want to find out why they're bullying others. I'll say to kids, why do kids bully others? And they'll say, well, they're angry. There's something going on. There's something going on in their personal life. Unless we get to the root causes of bullying, it's going to be very difficult to stop it. And we need to make sure the kids have a support and counseling, because they need help as well. Also, I talked about how key power and control is in bullying behaviors. Watch for signs of that in your family, in your home. If you have a child who's always trying to be dominant, control, use their power with either people in your family or others, that along with some of these other issues might be a cause for concern. You need to establish some really clear expectations. I expect you to be respectful and caring and inclusive of others. This is what I expect. And when you have those high expectations, I think that it actually gives the kids a sense of security. This is what my mom, my dad, my guardian believe in my home, and they will be more likely to meet your expectations. Maybe at times they need some reminders. Relationships that are positive and respectful are absolutely at the core of preventing bullying. If we weave positive relationships through home and school in the community, we are going to have less bullying. It's that sense of, again, as I mentioned earlier, modeling respect and compassion, inclusivity. Perhaps something might happen in the news and it's very disturbing, and you'll say, disturbing, well, this was a case of bullying, and how did you feel about that? And what would you do with? When we do that, and when we are also modeling respect and compassion, the kids see through that. Like, we don't even have to sit down and teach them a lesson. We are their, as parents, we are their number one role model. And if we're being caring and compassionate, they are going to want to model that behavior that they see from us. Again, throughout all of this, you want to communicate with the school on a regular basis. What do you do if your child is a bystander? They come to you. They don't know what to do. They're saying, it makes me feel bad. I feel sad. I'm worried. I'm scared. I'm helpless. They need some strategies. And often they don't want to get involved because they're afraid of retaliation, or they don't know what to do. They don't know who to go to. So when your child talks to you about bullying, and they'll say, yeah, well, it happened. Okay, so what can you do? You know, if you've come to me, that's fabulous. You're telling me, who else can you go to? Who would you talk to at the school? You want to talk to some adults who are going to listen to them and then respond. Again, as I mentioned with cyberbullying, there might not be the person who's cyberbullied or the one who's doing it, but there's a good chance they're reading it or they're seeing those photos. We want to teach them some strategies that give them that confidence to stand up. And I know kids have told me, say, what would you do? And they'll just post something and say, this isn't cool. And then when one child sees that, then they'll say, yeah, I guess it isn't cool. And another and another. Instead of being bystanders who stand back and watch and listen, but inside feel terrible, now they're being positive and they're making a difference, and others are following with their caring and compassionate behavior. Obviously, if your child is reporting that they're being bystanders, you also want to give them ways to stand up. It could be extending a hand, being a friend to that person, showing some sort of disapproval of what's going on, not providing the audience. As I mentioned earlier, again, a bully gets control and power when they see other kids laughing along and they think it's funny. But if you nurture that sense of, what can you do? What happens if you just pull away and there's a whole group of you who don't provide that audience? There's a good chance the bullying is going to stop, because your children are then giving a message to the bully. It's not cool. It's not entertaining. And we're not going to stand around and watch it or see it or hear it. Finally, it takes a village. If we all want to make sure that bullying is, if we can eliminate bullying, wow, that's phenomenal. But it starts with being aware of the problem, understanding the problem, doing what we can to prevent it from happening in the first place, respond, immediately intervene. But schools can't do it alone. Parents can't do it alone. Everyone needs to work together. It takes a village, and when we do that, I think that our schools, our homes, and our communities are going to be caring and respectful, and all children will be able to thrive. Thank you very much.